If you have not seen my original commentary on Peter Coffin, I would recommend doing so before continuing forward. Because Peter decided to respond to my video on them in a Substack post, and that's what we'll be covering today. They also cover a video done by actual Jake, however, I will not be responding to that portion. Now, before I really get into this article, I want to make it clear that I know Peter Coffin probably had never heard of me before until they saw my video on them, and as such, I'm not expecting them to be an expert on all things Ephraim. However, I am expecting that if they write an article with a series of claims about my character, they at least do some homework beforehand. You'll see why I'm saying this in a second, but until then, let's get into this. I focus on systemic critiques. I have recently begun regularly uploading to my YouTube channel, and have been more actively engaging with popular viewpoints and recent events. As one might expect, I've navigated through a sea of challenging and sometimes very positive feedback. For instance, an analysis I did of the movie trailer for an upcoming film, I am not reading that film title, was met pretty even-handedly by people across the political spectrum, and racial one as well. However, I pointed out that the recent H-Bomber Guy video on plagiarism, the most popular one he has ever made, with over 11 million views as of this writing, is essentially a call for individual responsibility and reverence for intellectual property laws. Why does it have to be about reverence for intellectual property, though? Why can't it just be that H-Bomber Guy wanted to find a way to criticize those who were copying others' works and passing them off as their own because he views doing such as immoral? The left folks, who generally claim to be against individual responsibility and bourgeoisie private property, became quite mad at me. First off, what do you mean by against individual responsibility? I am against mentioning it as an excuse to not have to engage in systemic critique when it's required. However, I'm not against holding people accountable for their actions. And your mention of private property is just a false dichotomy. For those unaware, in the Marxist sense, private property refers to, according to the website workers.org at least, the tools of production that should be owned by all of society, such as factories, land, stores, mines, and all those things that are gifts of nature or are built by many people over centuries but are now being monopolized by a few. Where is the incongruity in believing that is wrong and also thinking it's wrong to copy somebody else's work and attempt to pass it off as your own, also known as plagiarism? Or I guess I should say, where's the incongruity in believing that is wrong and also believing it's wrong to criticize people who plagiarize? Because I bluntly am not seeing it. I also want to talk about the videos Peter links in this paragraph because he misrepresents them quite a bit. The first one is a video by Abigail Thorne on the topic of Stoicism, which she opens by saying the philosophy has greatly helped her.
Once upon a time, I went through a very nasty breakup and my mental health really suffered. I was in a bad place. Until I went to see a therapist who knew a lot about Stoic philosophy.
One particular thing this therapist said, might I add, was that she should not worry about why she has certain feelings that she does, but should instead focus on trying to overcome them.
At one point, I asked her, but why do I feel this way? And she said, well, does it really matter? We could spend years psychoanalyzing your dreams or your childhood, and eventually we'll come up with something like, oh, your mother didn't breastfeed you enough as a child, or whatever. But you're still going to be left with the same question which brought you to therapy in the first place, namely, what are you going to do now? Are you going to accept the real world? Or not?
Now, don't get me wrong, she does acknowledge the fact that Stoicism does not allow systemic critique to be a massive drawback of the philosophy. In fact, she spends a good chunk of the second half of the video discussing just that. However, the fact that she can still call this one that helped her in spite of that fact means she's not against philosophies that don't have systemic critique inherently. let alone is she against individual responsibility, whatever the fuck that means. The second video is one from Second Thoughts called The Problem with Hyperindividualism. However, Second Thoughts doesn't say he's against individual responsibility. If anything, that sounds like a straw man of his argument. He more makes the point that you can't blame things like poverty on individual choices because they are affected by things like generational wealth, where you were born, and a variety of other factors that you had little to no control over.
In 2018, a group of Harvard researchers analyzed data from the US Census and attempted to find correlations between a person's life story and their current income. They discovered that there was such a strong connection between the place someone is born and their future income that they put together a map called the Opportunity Atlas, which shows the median incomes of people born in each zip code, and even predicts what those incomes will be in the future. In 2015, another study found a similar link between your future income and your parents' wealth. The report stated, "The wage gap for people from different backgrounds is significant. The expected income of people raised in well-off families in the 90th percentile, that is, the top 90% of the national median household income, is about 200% larger than the expected income of children raised in poor families, in the 10th percentile, and about 75% larger than that of children raised in middle-class families, in the 50th percentile. What's more, people raised in middle-class families will earn close to double what children from lower-income families earn in adulthood." Put simply, by combining these studies, sociologists are able to predict your lifetime income based on the zip code you were born in and how much money your parents make. How can we claim that anyone has enough power over their life path to punish them for failure when we know for a fact that racism, sexism, and discrimination wildly change your opportunities in life? Being a woman drastically affects your likely type of future employment, decreases your future income, and determines whether you spend years of your life doing domestic work, both paid and unpaid. Black Americans are born with roughly 8 times less family wealth, are underrepresented in elections, even after votes are counted, and are far more likely to face both hiring and workplace discrimination compared to white Americans. Race and employment type are deeply linked. In 2019, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics found that Hispanic Americans are nearly twice as likely to work service, construction, or industrial jobs as their white peers, and therefore twice as likely to face the health problems that kind of employment causes. Health outcomes, including life expectancy and future mental health issues, are connected to your race, your gender identity, and the zip code you were born in. Black communities, as one example, are far more likely to be subjected to toxic lead paint and unclear water, both of which can cause lifelong illnesses. Transgender people are much more likely to face depression as a result of being unable to transition or because of the bigotry they face from some corners of society. Both groups are more likely to be murdered outright, often by the police, and far less likely to have those murders solved.
However, although whether or not you are wealthy is very much determined by where you are born, whether or not you plagiarize isn't. James Somerton wasn't born in some area that made him more likely to plagiarize than others. That was still a choice he made. So this is completely non-comparable with what Second Thoughts talked about in this video. And the third video Peter links is ContraPoints' video on Jordan Peterson, where she actually begins by saying that she likes his self-help work, albeit she disagrees with his reactionary politics and worries that said self-help work is leading people who are fans of him down a right-wing path.
And I don't really object to any of the self-help stuff. Most of Peterson's fans are young men, and I mean, someone has to whip the neckbeards into shape, but there's a big problem here. And the problem is that all of this life coaching is basically just a Trojan horse for a reactionary political agenda. Peterson advocates an ethics of self-help, not merely as a guide to private life, but as a replacement for progressive politics, which he characterizes as totalitarian and evil.
This is an opinion Contra has expressed elsewhere, by the way. For example, she says that Peterson can actually be helpful to a subsect of lonely young men in her video on incels.
Essentially, you want to tell them, clean your room, bucko. In fact, for the young men in this demographic who are receptive to that kind of advice, Jordan Peterson is probably helpful because he's telling them a lot of what they need to hear, and he's kind of a sexist old man, so they might actually listen.
I also want to point out, Peter, you do know it's possible to be a leftist and dislike the people you've linked, right? I get what you're trying to do here, however this attempt to call out double standards fails to make sense, at least in my case, given I am a fan of exactly 0 of the 3 people who have been mentioned thus far. Fuck, I did a commentary on ContraPoints last year, therefore showing I clearly have some disagreements with her. And this is especially worth noting given the last video Peter links in this paragraph is one which explains the views of property held by Proudhon. But you can be a leftist and think Proudhon was full of shit. Karl Marx thought that, after all. With Marx's 1847 work, The Poverty of Philosophy, specifically being written in response to a work by Proudhon, that being The Philosophy of Poverty. As I have outlined in my previous work, particularly in my book Custom Reality and You, the media landscape, and continually more so the social one, has increasingly resembled a market, where attention is the prime currency. In Cray, I call this attentionomics, where the value of content is dictated not solely by its substance but by its popularity and the engagement it garners. The recent video by HBomberGuy serves as a prime example. To take my Cray metaphor further, it's like a high-value stock in this attention market, drawing substantial viewership, attention currency. In critiquing this popular H-bomb video, my stance positioned me in a role similar to that of shorting this highly valued stock. Wouldn't you making a video on said video and therefore possibly exposing it to a wider audience actually garner it more attention? Fuck, wouldn't you by engaging with the video be giving it more engagement? You never said this attention had to be positive. In fact, there are 2 separate tropes I can think of off the top of my head which specifically describe something or somebody getting attention for doing something terribly. Those being biofascination and no such thing as bad publicity. By challenging the prevailing narrative and the popular viewpoint, I've opened up a market for derivatives, essentially anti-Peter stocks. In less metaphorical terms, the situation has created a fertile ground for reaction streamers and content creators who are relatively less known. Seeing an opportunity to gain traction, they capitalize on my critique, framing their content as a counter-argument to the view that stands against a widely accepted and popular opinion. This tactic of, look guys, this wacko is disagreeing with what's popular, is a strategy to garner attention and views, essentially riding the wave of controversy I've generated. You know, this article came out the day after my top 15 worst commentaries of 2023 list. And I just want to say that if I was only interested in garnering views and attention, I probably wouldn't have spent most of December working on a video where I cover primarily other members of my rather niche community that very few people outside of it had ever heard of. Although I did include a couple of bigger names like, say, Star Giant Productions, a good chunk of that list was YouTubers with very few subscribers who I found either through, again, being in the same community as them or through happenstance. And as for the notion that I only spout popular opinions, which are clearly implying here, that video also debunks this idea, given my number 8 pick was Firebolt PT's video on IRL Gate, which was incredibly well received within said niche community. Another way of putting it is they take the engagement metrics as a sort of might makes right by numbers approach that capitalist markets ultimately justify. This phenomenon illustrates the incentive to identify dissenting voices, challenging high-value, popular content, and create a counter-argument specifically due to a lucrative opportunity for engagement and or currency, social or otherwise. Okay, now you're just blatantly calling me a grifter. Saying I only made my video on you in hopes of getting attention for reinforcing the popular opinion and not merely because I disagreed with you or thought you were incorrect. I mean, yeah, obviously I agree with the popular opinion more often than I don't, just like everybody, because that's what the popular opinion is. However, I wish to point out that you aren't actually engaging with what I said, you're just making attacks on my character. This is poisoning the well, plain and simple. But let's get into what Peter says about my video. The first video I want to address here was by a person calling themselves F Ramentator, a measured response indicating their parasocial fan relationship with H Bomber Guy. Hey, didn't the video of yours that I covered utilize the X is Y and here's Y title scheme, which was popularized by H Bomber Guy's video on Fallout 3? But no, Peter, you are totally right. I do, technically speaking, have a parasocial relationship with H Bomber Guy in the sense that I've enjoyed his videos and have never interacted with him one-on-one. What's your point exactly? 1. Understanding of plagiarism. My video views plagiarism as a result of systemic circumstances, not simply individual morality. Argues it's a complex issue embedded in the broader socioeconomic context, particularly under capitalism. F. Ramentator's video suggests I am defending plagiarism, misrepresenting my approach. Begins immediately at the start of the video. Except I didn't. I made a joke about that being my first impression based off the title, but I then immediately showed a clip of you clarifying your position, only to say I was willing to give the video a chance. A video defending plagiarism? Well, at the very least, this has my attention.
And I know that you're thinking to yourself, okay, all right, like a good little YouTube viewer, I clicked your video, I clicked like, I subscribed, I rang the bell, I did all that stuff. Now you got to tell me this insane opinion you have about how plagiarism is awesome. And, well, it's not. It's not a cool thing to do.
Damn it, I was tricked. But you know what? I'll give this video the time of day regardless. Intentionally represents any analysis I present as shallow and driven by a vendetta. Now, the part about your analysis being shallow is absolutely true. I completely concede to that. However, I never accused you of having a vendetta. Actually, I can think of only one thing in the video that might have led you to that conclusion, and it's this clip.
You see, what this is a Reddit post that makes sure you know it's positive by recommending some good queer YouTubers first, and then make space for the juice. What's the juice, you might ask? Well, it's a list of people to cancel. It's Internet Historian, who's a big baddie. Summerton is a baddie. We a Boss is a baddie. Johnny Harris is a baddie. Internet Historian is still a baddie. I guess James Stephanie Sterling is both a baddie and a queer creator worth recommending. Oh, and an Internet Historian, also a baddie.
You wonder why people are trying to ruin one another in this community. It's because of this mindset that anger and wrath wins. Oh boy, you lied to people. To the gulag you go! Forget the good you did for people. Forget the fact that you basically built the foundation of my channel and helped me get on my feet, junkie. You lied about people, and someone decided to out you for it. It's time to crucify you and make you walk on eggshells.
But I wasn't using that clip to respond to what Peter was saying. I was using it to draw a comparison between them and Spoctor. Again, fair is fair. I'm not expecting Peter to have ever heard of Spoctor before now, or understand why behaving in a way similar to him, especially in those clips, is a bad thing. However, I am at the very least expecting them to understand when I'm playing a clip for the sake of drawing a comparison. 2. Role of intellectual property law. My video critiques intellectual property law as serving the interests of the capitalist ruling class, suggests these laws don't adequately protect smaller creators, and serve platform holders, capitalists, reflecting a Marxist perspective. F. Ramentator's video misrepresents my critique of intellectual property law by ignoring IP law as a whole. There are no mentions of IP in this video. This video does not address class dynamics and power structures. Okay, here Peter is kind of right. I didn't really discuss those concepts in my video on them, Mainly because I actually agreed with most of what they said. And in content like this, when you don't have anything to say about what the video you're covering is arguing, you typically cut that part of the video out, both so the video doesn't drag and because watching large chunks of the original video where the person who's supposed to be commentating isn't saying anything just isn't all that entertaining. Especially given my main issue with your video was how you misrepresented what H-Bomber Guy said, and the fact that you ran under the assumption that plagiarism was inherently caused by capitalism, a stance I still disagree with. Me not addressing other parts of the video that have nothing to do with what I wanted to argue isn't misrepresentation, though. 3. Focus on individual responsibility. My video advocates against focusing solely on individual blame for plagiarism, emphasizes systemic factors and conditions that drive such behavior. Eframentator's video represents my stance as totally disregarding individual responsibility. Outwardly disregards all systemic thinking / forces. Okay, the first one is completely accurate and a result of what you said in your video. You treat this as somehow different from what was said originally, but it isn't. You went beyond just saying H-Bomber Guy should have focused on systemic critiques, which again, if that's how you feel, even if I disagree, I at the very least understand why you would think that, and started mocking people who were criticizing those like James Somerton and Illuminati for plagiarizing as simply wanting more baddies to hate, with the clear indicator being that disliking somebody because they plagiarized is irrational. How else is that supposed to come off, Peter? With that said, I bluntly didn't disregard all systemic thinking / forces. I basically just accused you of going to the opposite extreme that you accused H-Bomber Guy of being at. You say H-Bomber Guy focused only on individuals and not enough on systemic issues. Meanwhile, you not only solely focused on systemic issues, which is totally fine, by the way, if that's what you want to do, but also mocked people who criticized individuals who engaged in plagiarism. I'm not saying you shouldn't engage in systemic critiques. I am saying that you shouldn't turn systemic critiques into apologetics for the bad actions of individuals. There's a middle ground, and I felt like your video was leaning way too hard in one particular direction. 4. Systemic change versus individual actions. My video calls for an understanding that the harm of plagiarism comes from incentives and rewards, stemming from the fundamental contradiction that defines capitalism, socialization of production amid the private appropriation of product and therefore profit, and that ending that harm requires a change in the entire economic and social system, not just individual behavior modification. Highlights the need for understanding and addressing the broader socioeconomic causes of plagiarism. Eframentator's video misrepresents my call to focus on systemic critiques as excusing and even defending plagiarism, which I even said is not good at 1:16 in my video. Again, nowhere did I seriously claim that. You're just making it up. I even checked the transcript of the video for the words Peter puts in quotations, and I couldn't find anything. Nowhere did I use the word excuse, and the only place where I used the word defend was again at the beginning of the video in a clip I've already talked about. Now, to clarify, given that I just said that Peter was engaging in apologetics for plagiarists, I don't think Peter likes plagiarism, but I do think they downplay the actions of those who engage in it, through framing their actions not just as bad actions done by them, but also the end result of the capitalist system, which needs to be front and center in every discussion about plagiarism, no matter what. All while, again, mocking the people who were actually criticizing those who engage in it. Claims H-Bomber Guy touches on systemic issues by mentioning YouTube content mills and how they encourage plagiarism for profit. However, content mills are a result, not a cause of anything on a systemic level. Yeah, and after describing them, H-Bomber Guy explained why these existed, that being because they generate profit. To use a segment from the clip I played in my original video on you, H Bomber Guy concluded,
It turns out it's the same twist it always is. Why did this stupid shit happen? Oh, it's money!
you specifically note that H-Bomb admits they encourage plagiarism for profit, which begs the question, why is profit important? Because we live under capitalism. If we didn't live under a system where we were expected to gain wealth through our actions, we would not have an incentive to engage in dishonest things for profit. The systemic critique is right there, if anything. Sure, it's not as direct as it could be, but it still exists for those who want to hear it. This is a massive misunderstanding, intentional or not, of what systemic means. I would argue this is downstream of H-Bomb's inadequate/incorrect articulation of what systemic means in the original video. And no explanation of what Peter means by that. The only reason I even showed this part is because this is the only time when discussing a part of my video, Peter uses a timestamp so I can reference what they're talking about. I'm going to be skipping the next bullet point and the conclusion of the section on me, as well as the entirety of the section on actually Jake. Instead, I'm just going to go straight to Peter's conclusion. In reviewing the responses from Efromentator and actual Jake, it becomes evident that my emphasis on systemic critique has been misrepresented. Both have reduced my arguments to an oversimplified binary of disregarding individual ethics as a means to defend the baddies. You really seem to like this idea that I'm just mad you defended people that I dislike? And while I'm not going to sit here and act like there isn't some truth to that, my issue isn't that you defended these people, it's what you said to do such a thing. If you had, for example, disproven parts of H-Bomber Guy's video, I would be having a very different reaction. My issue is not merely you defending people I dislike, it's you attempting to reframe them. From people who did something bad to people who were just experiencing capitalism. This oversimplification not only misinterprets my position, but also dismisses the nuanced approach required to understand what the actual harm of plagiarism is. The harm is the deprivation of reward for creative labor by way of incentive to do less scrupulous actions to gain that reward with less effort. This deprivation and the ensuring unethical behavior must be understood not just as individual moral failings, but as outcomes. While I do think plagiarism is ultimately a bad action to take, the response H-Bomber Guy's fanbase and the broader left has expressed no desire to address the actual harm, instead hyper-focusing on opportunities to punish individuals, often coming from individuals who have advocated for restorative justice, a utopian alternative to punitive action. What do you mean by actual harm, Peter? Because H-Bomber Guy did do something to correct the wrongs that occurred because of plagiarism. He ended the video by saying he was going to compensate every person that James Somerton plagiarized.
I'm going to be dividing any of the ad revenue this video makes among the creators James stole from. I'll be conducting a thorough examination of every video James has posted, including the many he has deleted I can find archives of, and contact everyone I can.
And none of this is even getting into the section where he shouts out various LGBT YouTubers for around 2 minutes, which resulted in them getting a massive increase in subscribers. Matt Baum got 30,000 new subscribers over the course of December 2023, primarily because of H-Bomber Guy's shoutout of him. Kamija Mabauje got 26,000 subscribers. Lady Emily got 19,000 subscribers. Sean Spear got 34,000 new subscribers. Ricky Hirsch got 19,400 new subs. Verily Bitchy got 27,000 new subscribers. And Alexander Avila got 67,000 subscribers thrown his way as a result of H-Bomber Guy's video. Avila, by the way, being somebody who H-Bomber Guy caught James Somerton stealing from. both in the form of him admitting it in a DM conversation he had with Avila.
Summerton apologised for using his material without asking, claiming he intended to reach out but forgot to, and he had been in a rush to finish the video before the end of Pride Month, and in this rush he ended up using a lot more of your content than I ever intended.
And through a picture of James's timeline as he was editing the video, which he posted onto Twitter.
Before you'd even uploaded the video, you posted a picture of the Sherlock section of your timeline, and the source footage is clearly labeled, "Are they gay?" You had proven you plagiarized Avila before the video was even done.
This notion that H-Bomber Guy is only interested in mindlessly punishing James Summerton to be as blunt as possible is utterly false. Although he is criticizing Summerton and demanding he take accountability for his actions, he is also attempting to benefit the people who James stole from. Also, what is anti-restorative about what H-Bomber Guy did? It's not as if he sentenced James Summerton to 2 years in internet jail or whatever. He just laid out all of the bad things James Summerton had done. We can discuss how exactly to respond to this information, don't get me wrong. However, that was not something H-Bomber Guy talked about outside of telling his viewers not to harass James Summerton.
Any harassment or threats Summerton may have received are unconscionable and wrong. I want to clarify right now that if anyone harasses Summerton on my behalf, they are worse than him and will not see the light of heaven.
Eframmentator and Actual Jake, in their responses, focus heavily on the ethics of individual content creators, implying that my analysis excuses or defends unethical practices. However, this interpretation misses the core of my argument. While individual choices matter on the individual level, they are influenced and sometimes outright dictated by the broader economic and social systems in which we operate. When did I deny this? You don't fucking answer that, Peter. In fact, I went back and checked my original video on you, and when I play you essentially saying that, I criticize it, not because I disagree, but because I feel like that statement is obvious. Here's the clip if you don't believe me.
But over the course of this video, I'm going to ask you to consider an alternative view. It's not really so much that it is a good or a bad thing, but instead a result of circumstances and conditions.
So is everything else. Every action that occurs is the result of certain conditions and certain circumstances, which are different things, apparently, even though they are really just synonyms for each other. I just want to say that Peter hasn't even really strawmanned me here. Strawmanning would imply that he took my point and made it weaker. Peter has done nothing but invert my points throughout this entire fucking article. Me playing a clip of Spoctor to compare Peter to the behavior shown in that clip is me playing that clip because I agree with it. At least I think, because Peter did not explain what part of my video he was talking about when they said it. Me saying that H-Bomber Guy did talk about systems primarily becomes me saying that you shouldn't talk about systems and you should only talk about individuals. And me saying that what Peter said was obvious is now me disagreeing with it, I think. This isn't arguing against me. This isn't arguing a strawman version of me. This is arguing against me if I were in the alternate dimension from Star Trek where everyone had a fucking goatee. In discussing the role of intellectual property law, I aimed to shed light on how these laws often favor large corporations and platforms, further complicating the landscape for individual creators, particularly ones harmed by plagiarism. This point, unfortunately, was overlooked, misunderstood, or intentionally omitted in these critiques. I agree. That was never a point of contention, and to be blunt, I am kind of annoyed by your implication that it was. I criticized you for very specific things, Peter, and none of them had anything to do with intellectual property. Because I thought you were right on that. What you said was totally true. It is created by the powerful to their benefit. That is completely right. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend like agreeing on that means that I have to absolve you of every single thing I thought you got wrong in your original video. Instead, I'm going to address what I think you were wrong on, and not really talk about the stuff I thought you were right about. Anyway, that's all I want to cover, so final thoughts? This article did not change my mind about Peter's analysis. If anything, all it did was show that Peter can't really defend what they said. Good night, and good luck.